Wife cheated on his husband and changed him for another one who had more money. 6 months later, she received a mail with a CD inside. She'd never imagined what it said. Sarah Thompson stared out the kitchen window of their modest suburban home, watching the rain streak down the glass. The coffee in her mug had gone cold, much like her marriage. She checked her phone again. A text from Richard. "Can't wait to see you. Dinner at Le Chateau tonight?" She smiled despite herself. Richard Caldwell had entered her life 3 months ago at a friend's gallery opening. Unlike Michael, Richard wore success like a second skin. Custom suits, a Mercedes convertible, and a confidence that made her feel seen in ways she hadn't in years. Michael came through the front door, exhausted as usual. His startup was just about to turn the corner, he'd been saying for 2 years now. "Hey," he said, setting down his laptop bag. "Sorry I'm late. The investor meeting ran long." Sarah nodded absently. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge." "Thanks," Michael said, studying her face. "Everything okay?" She couldn't bear his kindness. That was the worst part. Michael was good, dependable, loving. But 7 years in, she wanted more than their cramped house and careful budgeting, more than promises of someday. "I'm going out tonight," she said. "With friends." The lie tasted bitter. This would be her 4th night out with Richard in 2 weeks. Later that evening, as Richard ordered $200 champagne, she tried to ignore the guilt twisting in her stomach. "You deserve this," Richard whispered, his hand on hers. "You deserve everything." 3 weeks later, Sarah finally gathered her courage. She sat Michael down in their living room, the space suddenly feeling suffocating. "I've met someone," she said, the words hanging heavy between them. "I want a divorce." Michael's face crumpled, then went eerily calm. "Is it because of money? Because the company's about to—" "It's not just that," she interrupted, though they both knew it was a significant part. "We want different things. We've grown apart." Michael didn't fight, didn't rage. He simply nodded, as if he'd been expecting this all along. "I hope he makes you happy," he said, rising from the couch. Within a week, Michael had moved out, leaving Sarah with the house until she sold it to move into Richard's downtown penthouse. The divorce proceedings were quick and clean. Michael asked for almost nothing, signing papers without contesting any of her requests. As Sarah unpacked her clothes in Richard's walk-in closet, she convinced herself she'd made the right choice. This was the life she was meant for. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments, she found herself missing the way Michael used to read to her before bed, or how he remembered exactly how she liked her coffee. But those were small things, she told herself. Small sacrifices for the security and luxury she now enjoyed. If there was a hollow feeling in her chest some nights, surely it would fade with time. 6 months passed in a blur of charity galas and weekend getaways to Richard's beachfront property in the Hamptons. Sarah had everything she thought she wanted: designer clothes, luxury vacations, and a Black American Express card that seemed to have no limit. Yet the shine of her new life was beginning to dull. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of Richard's penthouse. Her hair was professionally highlighted, her nails perfectly manicured, but there was something vacant in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Sarah, where did you put my cufflinks? The platinum ones?" Richard's voice echoed through the apartment. "Check the top drawer of your dresser," she called back, applying another coat of mascara. They were attending a fundraiser that evening, another night of Richard parading her around like an accessory while he networked with clients. She had become adept at smiling on cue and making appropriate small talk, skills that earned her Richard's approval but left her feeling hollow. Richard appeared in the doorway, already irritated. "I told you to keep them in the jewelry box. This is the third time you've misplaced them." "I didn't misplace anything," Sarah replied, keeping her voice even. "You wore them to the Henderson dinner last week." Richard's jaw tightened. "You need to be more organized. This is exactly why I've been hesitant about adding you to my accounts." There it was, the not-so-subtle reminder that everything she enjoyed existed at his pleasure. Despite his promises when she'd left Michael, Richard had kept their finances completely separate. Her spending, though generous, was monitored and occasionally critiqued. Later that evening, after an uncomfortable dinner where Richard had commented on her unnecessary second glass of wine, they returned to the penthouse in tense silence. "We need to discuss the household budget," Richard announced as they entered. "Your spending last month was excessive." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Excessive? I bought groceries and some clothes for the charity event you insisted I attend." "The point is," he said, checking his watch impatiently, "you need to consult me before making purchases over a certain amount. That's just responsible financial management." As Richard retreated to his home office, Sarah realized with a sickening clarity that she had traded one kind of constraint for another. With Michael, they had been partners with limited means. With Richard, she was comfortable but controlled. The next morning, after Richard left for work, Sarah collected the mail from the concierge. Among the bills and advertisements was a small padded envelope addressed to her in familiar handwriting. Her heart stuttered. Alone in the apartment, she carefully opened it to find a CD in a clear case and a handwritten note. "Watch Channel 8 at 9 p.m. next Friday. You deserve to know. Michael." Sarah turned the CD over in her hands, conflicted. She hadn't heard from Michael since the divorce. Why now? What could he possibly want to tell her that required this cloak and dagger approach? She slipped the CD into Richard's rarely used entertainment system. The screen flickered to life, showing only a brief clip of Michael sitting in what appeared to be a television studio, adjusting his tie before the image went black. For the next week, Sarah carried Michael's note with her everywhere, taking it out when she was alone, reading it over and over. She made excuses to avoid dinner with Richard on Friday night, claiming a migraine. As 9 o'clock approached, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, remote in hand, her stomach knotted with anxiety. She had no idea what Michael was about to reveal to the world, and to her, but something told her it would change everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned on the television. Her finger hovered over the channel button, hesitation gripping her for a moment before she finally pressed it. Channel 8, a business news program she'd never watched before, filled the screen. Tonight, we have a special interview with Michael Thompson, the silent force behind Thompson Tech Manufacturing and Evergreen Development Group, the host announced. A reluctant CEO whose story might surprise you. The camera panned to reveal Michael, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He looked different, confident, polished in a tailored navy suit she'd never seen before. His usually tousled hair was neatly styled, his posture straight and assured. This wasn't the overworked, frustrated Michael she'd left behind. "Mr. Thompson, your companies have shown remarkable growth this past year, yet you've stayed out of the public eye until now. Why the change?" the host asked. Michael smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Sometimes clarity comes from unexpected places. I inherited these companies from my uncle shortly before my divorce. He'd been grooming me for years without my knowledge, having me work in various departments during summers and holidays since college. When he passed, I discovered I was his successor. Sarah's mouth went dry. Inherited? Companies? Her mind reeled with questions. And why keep this inheritance quiet during your divorce proceedings? Most men in your position would have flaunted their wealth, the host pressed. Michael looked directly into the camera, and Sarah felt as if he were looking straight at her. When someone leaves you for what they perceive as better prospects, broadcasting your sudden wealth feels manipulative. I wanted a clean break without complications. The host leaned forward. Are you saying your ex-wife left you without knowing about your inheritance? She left believing I was still the struggling engineer with uncertain prospects, Michael confirmed. And perhaps that's who I was in her eyes. The timing was unfortunate. Current estimates put your net worth at approximately $47 million. Any regrets about not revealing this information sooner? Michael paused, considering. None. Money changes how people see you, how they value you. I've learned that lesson twice now. Once when I didn't have it, and once when I did. Sarah sank back against the pillows, stunned. $47 million. Michael had been worth $47 million when she'd left him for Richard's money. The irony was almost too much to bear. What about your personal life, Mr. Thompson? Any new relationships on the horizon? The host asked with a smile. I'm focused on my companies right now, Michael replied. But I've learned something valuable about relationships. He paused, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw a flash of the vulnerability she once knew. Love can't be bought, and I wouldn't want it if it could. When someone chooses to stay with you through the struggles, that's real. Everything else is just convenience. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She fumbled for the remote and switched off the TV, the silence of the apartment suddenly overwhelming. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. Sarah stared at the message, seeing it with new clarity. Richard's meetings had been running late more frequently lately. She'd found unfamiliar perfume on his shirt last week. The pattern was familiar because she had once been on the other side of it. She walked to the window of the penthouse, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there was Michael, the man she'd discarded for a wealthier model, only to discover he'd been wealthy all along. But it wasn't the money that made her heart ache. It was the realization that Michael had known her true colors and had chosen dignity over revenge or manipulation. He could have told her about the inheritance when she'd announced her affair. He could have fought for her with promises of wealth and security. Instead, he'd let her go, allowed her to make her choice without influence. Sarah slid down against the wall until she sat on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. For the first time since leaving Michael, she cried, not for the wealth she might have shared, but for the person she had revealed herself to be. The truth was laid bare. She hadn't left Michael because of Richard's money. She'd left because she lacked faith. Faith in Michael, faith in their love, faith in herself to weather the uncertainty of life with someone who truly cared for her. And now that faith had been rewarded to a man who no longer wanted her, it was, she realized with bitter understanding, a perfect justice. Sarah stared at the resignation letter on her screen. After 3 more weeks with Richard, weeks filled with tense silences and thinly veiled accusations, she had finally gathered the courage to leave. The interview had been a catalyst, but the decision was about more than Michael's revelation. Going somewhere? Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Yes, she said simply. I'm leaving. His face hardened. Because your ex-husband has money now? How predictable. No, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. Because I made the same mistake twice, defining my worth through someone else's wallet instead of my own character. She'd already secured a small apartment and accepted a position teaching business communications at the local community college. Skills from her former marketing career repurposed for something meaningful. Months passed. Sarah established a routine in her new life. Teaching classes, volunteering at a financial literacy program for women leaving difficult situations, rebuilding herself piece by piece. She hadn't reached out to Michael. Whatever his intentions with the interview, she owed him space and respect for his boundaries. It was at a fundraiser for the literacy program that fate intervened. Sarah was arranging name tags when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Hello, Sarah. She turned to find Michael, looking much as he had on television, confident but with gentler eyes than she remembered. Michael, I didn't know you'd be here. I'm one of the donors, he explained. Your program director made a compelling pitch. They stood awkwardly until Michael broke the silence. I should explain about the interview. It wasn't meant as revenge. You don't owe me explanations, Sarah said quietly. Perhaps not, but I want to give one. That interview was for me. I needed to speak my truth publicly to move forward. The CD was... Maybe that was unfair. Sarah shook her head. It was fair. Everything you said was fair. As the event wrapped up, Michael hesitated by the door. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Not to revisit the past, just to check in. Sarah considered his offer. I'd like that. 2 weeks later, they sat in a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. Michael stirred his Americano while Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug. I've been seeing someone, Michael said eventually. Nothing serious yet, but she's kind. Sarah nodded, surprised by her lack of jealousy. That's good. You deserve kindness. And you? Are you seeing anyone? No, I'm focusing on myself right now. She paused. I'm sorry, Michael. Not just for leaving, but for who I was when I did. Michael studied her face. We all make mistakes, Sarah. The question is what we learn from them. As they talked about her teaching, his companies, mutual friends, Sarah realized they were building something new. Not romance rekindled, but something perhaps more valuable. A friendship rooted in hard-earned honesty and respect. When they parted, Michael surprised her with a light hug. I'm proud of you, he whispered. Finding your own way. Walking home alone, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. The woman who had chased wealth at the cost of her integrity was gone. In her place stood someone wiser, someone who understood that the richest life came not from what you possessed, but from the grace with which you handled both success and failure. True wealth, she had finally learned, was the capacity to grow from mistakes and to offer forgiveness, both to others and to yourself.